more and more value in you being good at these things because you can offer help to others, businesses, people, whatever it happens to
Yeah,
be.
total
right?
society. culture
Stimulating
change.
to look at. That that's the hook itself. So they don't even have to do the heavy lifting. As the owners of the platform, they just rely on what people generate and they just leverage that.
Sheep following the crowd. I think that's the best way to put it.
Exactly.
Hi everybody, welcome back down to the farm for Down the Farm podcast of Henry Carpenter. If it's the first time you're listening, welcome to the podcast. The podcast was created by myself when I had a life-changing accident at the age of 14. A couple of years later, I learned so much life lessons and so much life aspiration that I want to bring everyone back down to the farm to the podcast and to learn so much new stuff. And today's guest brings a lot of new stuff in terms of IT. Now, I'm not the best at IT. That's definitely one for certain, but I've learned so much in the last couple of years once I started the podcast, but also lots of media, other stuff we've done so far. So today's guest is Dan. I'm not going to pronounce his last name because I just can't do it. Dan's worked in IT for many, many years, decades, and is originally from Poland. I first met Dan actually at a marketing event day, same as Sam Mees from our previous guests. And since then, we've worked on lots of different projects together to basically create lots of good ideas. And one of the things was his podcast. But this week, he joins me on Down the Farm podcast to talk all about his IT experience, how AI and lots of other marketing things are shaping the future generations, and much more. So sit back, relax, and enjoy this episode with a great man and great inspiration. Well, Down the Farm podcast, welcome to this episode. We're here with Dan, and he's kindly let us use his studio. So firstly, Dan, thank you for letting us use the studio to record today.
You are very welcome.
And welcome onto the podcast. I hope you're really well. I know there's a bit of a sore throat, but apart from that, we're all good and ready to go.
All good, ready to roll.
So welcome to the podcast, firstly. But can you just tell us a bit about your background, first of all? Really, we wanted to start just to learn a bit about you. I know you're originally from Poland as well, so explain that sort of transition. It was a long time ago, nearly about 13 years, I think now.
Yes, it's been a long time.
Yeah, just tell us a bit about you, first of all.
Okay, so my name is Daniel Chrzastek. It's not the easiest thing to pronounce. I do get that, My background is specifically in technology, all sorts of sort of niches around that. Over the years, since the university days, I've been involved in, all sorts of, techie stuff. It's something I'm passionate about, and this is what I'm kind of building my business around as well. So we can talk about that later. But in a nutshell, I've gone through the traditional sort of schooling system, university and stuff like this. And at that point, when I was finishing my bachelor's degree, I'm like, okay, in order to get like an interesting job, I would have to move to a different city. And then I've got a cousin here in the UK, and she's like, maybe you can just visit us and just see if you can find anything. And the rest is history.
Oh, wow.
That's
so
how
you
it
literally
happened.
just came on a whim, really, I suppose.
Yep. Yeah.
I bet that was a bit nerve-wracking.
It was, I think, after it happened, I realized how tough it was. But at the moment when it was happening, there was just too much going on to actually think about, any like risks or, overcomplicate things in my mind, because I would easily do that. I just didn't have time to do it because there was so much to sort out, admin side, paperwork and all these things. It was an interesting process.
So you originally are trained in IT, aren't you?
Yes.
So did you come over here to work in IT?
That was the idea, yeah. So after graduation, I wanted to just see if I can find something here, because I knew that in order to find anything more interesting in terms of, let's say, bigger, corporate job and stuff like this, I would have to move to a different city from where I graduated. So I would have to go through that process in some way, shape, or form anyway. So I'm like, okay, why not try a country, right? And because I had a connection here, I just thought, it's worth trying, Since a really young age, I think I was roughly 8 when I started, I was learning English anyway. So I was lucky that my mom thought about that, that it might be useful for me. And I actually loved it. So that was the leverage that I had, that, I was pretty good with the language before I moved here.
Right.
But on that subject, nothing would prepare me for the variety of different sort of accents.
Oh yeah.
The practicality of it, the technical side of it, like knowing the grammar or whatever. Okay, you can get by, right? But all the small talk, people just chatting on the street to you, like random people that you don't know. That's something that I was like, what's happening?
Is that different to Poland? Is there like people? I mean, UK is quite like, oh, hello, good morning, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
originally. I mean, it's kind of changing a bit now, I think, as we modernize. But is that sort of Poland quite like that as well?
Unless you know someone, you wouldn't really talk to them.
Heads down, yeah.
No, so it's very, very rare. It does happen, don't get me wrong, but statistically, it's very rare to see, right?
Okay.
Unless you're like maybe in a pharmacy and you are, a bunch of, elderly, people, they will chat to each other, right? But other than that, on the street, nobody's gonna chat up to you unless you're a good-looking woman.
That happens here as well. Many attempts tried, but always failed.
So if they're trying to get your number, that's a different story. But yeah, so it doesn't happen that much. If you know someone, yes, they will, approach you, etc. But if it's a stranger, it doesn't really happen.
I find the IT systems things like really interesting, especially of like the farming sector now. Obviously, we're partly based as farmers in the podcast, but like IT systems are growing and growing and growing at a very rapid rate, especially the AI stuff. We're looking at now tractors are using mostly computers to do most of the work. It's just the implement driver who plots the data and that sort of thing. So there's lots of different sectors in loads of different businesses. We'll mention some other stuff later on, but you think that it's going to start taking over possibly a few job cuts in sectors like that?
Well, it's a tricky one because I really want to say no, but the reality is that it's likely a yes. And the reason that I want to say no is that you have to. So if you are someone listening who is afraid that it might be putting your job at risk specifically, the way to think about it is it's going to shift the required skill set to a new thing.
Yeah.
And some of those jobs don't exist yet, but they will eventually. It's just that it's going to be a massive shift in how many people are required to do certain things. Obviously, that's one thing. But also, from an operator of a tractor, let's say, you will have to become the programmer of the tractor, maybe.
Yeah.
So I would think of that, as an opportunity that, you can kind of upskill yourself to work on this. Let's say if you become an expert in the let's say navigation of the tractors and how to optimize the tracks so it covers as much of the field as possible in one pass, that's potentially an area of expertise that might be valuable to the sector.
It's definitely a different outlook. I think you just have to, it's modernization, isn't it, in a whole. I really think that. What kind of first drew you to IT? Was it there much that sort of interested you when you first started?
Ooh, yes.
Because obviously you're very passionate about it and you've worked hard, you've worked up the ranks. So what kind of, when you were a youngster, what kind of really first, or even today, still, ambitiously makes you feel like, right, we're going to do some stuff, or I want to get involved in this, get involved in that?
So it depends how far back we go, right? Ever since I was a kid at school, I was into like video games and stuff like this. So that sort of creates the connection with the computers. Because back then, that's the only way to have proper like gaming experience, right? You have to have a PC, you have to have some form of a computer, in order to play games. So that sparked the interest with the tech in general. Like, oh, this is the piece of tech. I need to be able to operate it in order to enjoy my hobbies, right? So that was the starting point of the entire thing. And then it just sort of cascaded from that. So, okay, so if I do have a PC, how does it work, right? And then how do I build one myself, And so I have done that at some point. And then I was building PCs for other people as well at some point. So it was really like, just gradually going from there because it was a genuine interest, a bit selfish, I just wanted to enjoy my hobbies and that's where it started. And then it became a valuable sort of asset to have because when I was approaching the university age, at that point, everybody was like in management. It was very popular sort of subject when it comes to the universities over in Poland. Everybody wanted to be a manager, a director, or whatever. And I just saw an opportunity, a growing opportunity in the tech itself, whether it's programming, whether it's, just working around websites, maybe, borderline design of these things. Because that area, that niche was still quite fresh at the time. It was a long time ago, so I'm not a youngster anymore. So that's why,
because all your family and my family, especially like the grandparents, you forget like none of this stuff existed when they were young. It's not till probably well, probably till like my grandparents, probably like, 30, 35-ish probably before they started kind of implementing some of it.
Mm.
And it's like, actually, it's pretty mad. You've grown up in kind of how it's developed into some modern society culture. Like, do you think that's probably helped you in terms of your career?
I definitely say that it did. Just the transition itself was quite interesting because growing up as a teenager, right, we wouldn't spend as much time in front of the screens or TVs. We would just, go on our bikes, with friends, and we would just spend time outdoors, especially in the summer. And that was, let's say the old school way of spending time,
Of course, yeah.
which was great. And then around that time, when I was a teenager, getting closer to my 20s, that's when the transition started happening. So kids would spend more and more time, on the PCs, playing games, whatever it happens to be, or just, communicating with other people because the internet was, broadly available, etc. So at that point, the transition started happening. So you could see more and more value in you being good at these things because you can offer help to others, businesses, people, whatever happens to be.
Total
right?
society culture change. And there's this funny thing I saw on Facebook, like it was 50 years ago, the parents dragging the kids back inside, and now it's 50 years later, the parents dragging the kid outside because it's still addicted to. So do you think that, obviously we did discuss this before we even recorded, of this addictiveness of the social media itself and stuff like that. Would you agree that it's designed at the moment as a marketed to get people's attention and to eventually be addictive to oneself?
So there's no question about it. Absolutely, yes. It's a hard yes. There's literally no debate around that one because, even if you try to argue against it, how do you then justify all those methods that they have in place to actually, keep you using the app for longer, right?
Yeah.
There's just so many psychological sort of tricks that they are utilizing to keep our brain entertained, right? From the type of content, so we moved from photos because they were sufficient for a while. Now everything is a video. Why? Because it keeps you occupied. It keeps your brain active. So you get those dopamine sort of spikes from watching stuff. Now, why does certain pieces of content go viral? They go viral because they are so catchy. They are just so pleasant and stimulating to look at. That that's the hook itself, so they don't even have to do the heavy lifting, as the owners of the platform. They just rely on what people generate and they just leverage that.
Sheep following the crowd. I think that's the best way to put it.
Exactly.
So I think if as a business owner, it's probably the best way of doing it is understanding the market space. Would you agree? As in
100%.
Understanding how to do it, understanding how the social media space works. But I think really if you're a consumer of the end product, you kind of have to realize how addictive it can be.
Yep.
There's two sides of social media. There's the great side of marketing and great things happening, but also the darker side and stuff like that. So is there any advice you give to anyone how they could possibly filter through the two, or are the algorithms slightly designed to make you go for the darker side?
It's a tricky one as well because there is no like binary answer to this question. And the reason why I say this is as follows, right? You have to be exposed to it to understand what works. So you have to consume a little bit. If you don't want to do it yourself because you are really like against it and you don't want to spend the time on it, at least you have to have someone in your organization who really gets it.
Yeah.
And these days you'd call them like brain rot teenagers, right? That's the term, right? That all they know is the social media and stuff like this. But it's true. You have to understand what you're dealing with, right? So if you're doing your marketing yourself because you're just starting out, you got to dip the toe. You really have to have a look at this up close, understand what works. But that's why I say that it's not really a gray zone. It is a bit of a gray zone. It's not a 0-1 sort of a game here because in order to understand it, you can't just consume it. It's not about just looking at it, because that's not going to give you any information. What you have to pay attention to is, okay, I see this clip. I've already seen it 5 times since yesterday. Why? Right? Why does it have 1 million views? Why does it have 5 million views or 8 million, right? There's something about it that makes it so popular. So pay attention to what's on it, how it's structured. So then you can make some notes as well as you're watching it. Like, let's say within 3 seconds, this happened, right? 5 seconds later, this happened. So again, it just keeps me like active, and it keeps me like occupied, and it keeps me entertained, right? So because I can guarantee you there's going to be something that keeps you, just,
Yeah, it's that 3-second hook, the audio visual hook. That's
so
what I like
it
to call
gets your attention first, but then there's got to be something happening on that screen that keeps you entertained throughout the length of the video. So if you pay attention to it that way, you're less likely to be just hooked up with the dopamine spikes, because you're just focusing on certain things rather than just watching for the sake of watching, because that's a trap that you can easily fall into. And then it becomes addictive, as you say. But if you consume with the purpose of learning, that's a different approach. You're not going to be scrolling every 3 seconds. You're going to be actually watching the entire thing and analyzing it. So that slows down the consumption speed, and your brain has a chance to actually pay attention to the details and what happens on the screen and why.
Yeah, I mean, that's fascinating, you telling us that, because that's, for me, what I always thought about when I've been trying to watch. I always try it, but simply, I always try and watch the video the whole way through, because otherwise your mind just goes a bit like, well, hang on, I'm sort of the sheep that actually can't stop it being addictive. As also, you were saying about the vision thing as well, possibly. So talk to us about
yes. So there's been a study done. I can't remember who is responsible for this and where exactly it did take place. So forgive me for just giving you like a partial picture of it. But the whole sort of concept is that the new generation of kids and young adults, because they were consuming so much content on the screens, and they were looking at the screens from a really like close up sort of distance, many of these people are losing the peripheral vision. And what do I mean by this? As the human being, as it's as we developed our ability to have, let's say, some sort of safety measures in terms of how we evolved, right? We see detail in the center of our sort of let's say range of sight, right? So the center bit is where we see the detail, but then the peripheral vision is where we see movement but no detail, right? So in martial arts, for example, this is how you can protect yourself, because you can see the movement somewhere like further away from you, like to the side. You can see something is coming your way, so you can already respond to it. But then you don't need to see the detail at that point. You just need to see the movement, right? And what kids are losing now because of the screen time and the, let's say, you can kind of call it like a lazy eye syndrome kind of thing. So the study shown that there is a number of accidents happening simply because they just can't see, to the side, right? So they only see where the detail is visible, right? But where the motion is supposed to happen, the peripheral vision, that's what they are kind of, failing, right?
That's
so they could have avoided an accident if they saw the car coming, but they just didn't. So they didn't slam the brakes, for example, because they just
the focus of just completely call it locking in as a pun, but completely locking into the screen the whole time.
Exactly. Yeah.
That could be a problem we have to face in the future as well. I mean, do you think maybe there are going to be a few problems that society will face in the future because of this?
Yeah. I think
especially having a young child yourself as well.
Yeah, it's only a one single example of a bigger problem, right? And it's going to affect things and people in certain ways that we can't even see yet, right? Another example of something like this is the light exposure, right? It's been scientifically proven that we respond to different stimuli based on the light that we're exposed to as well. So, for example, we burn fat faster in natural light. So we switch to the, fat burning mode in natural light faster than in an LED sort of lit, studios and spaces. So because
you're pretty screwed
there. Exactly. So if you are, 95% of your time indoors with like artificial light, you're gonna have, let's say your body responding better to carbohydrates, for example, right? So you're going to be in that sort of, sugar burning mode way more than the fat burning mode. So that's not necessarily the ideal situation here, right? So that's just one example, right? And that's also one of the newer studies that I read about. So there's plenty of things like this happening. LED lighting in general isn't very healthy for us, right? So our eyes also get a bit more lazy because of that light. type of light, whether it's the wavelength itself, frequency, etc. There's just so many things that people are not measuring because it just makes too much money for the companies out there.
Yeah, people aren't showing it, are they? Again,
That's
it's just that fact that people sadly aren't made aware of it. And we're quite lucky because we work in these sectors that we get to see a bit more of the media side, not necessarily all the product side. I'm sure there's products we're probably not aware of that are very, very bad for us and they're not letting us know. But yeah, it's definitely something that people need to be aware of.
Sorry to interrupt you, lads, but this week's sponsor needs a bit of a shout out. Dan the Farm Media offers video and audio services from marketing, social events, and social media. Anything from weddings all the way to parties, anything from marketing pages all the way to social media posts, I suppose. Anything and everything on visual and audio they can do and supply for you. They are based also with the podcast a bit, so they must be good. All their stuff is down below in the description, but I'll shut up now and let you guys carry on with the great chat you're having already.
I think one thing that's really interesting is talking to one of our ex-guests, Sam Meese. I know also he's probably going to be a guest on yours as well, or has been. And basically, we were talking about the food production and how healthy it is. And me being out in Kenya, I realised actually that the UK is really quite bad for food production, as in on the supermarket shelves. The organic stuff's really good, and the backing British farming, all that stuff is really, really good. But in terms of the actual, when you go into the supermarket, there's not really anything that isn't ultra processed on the shelf pretty much whatsoever. So I know you were saying a bit about your biohacking, as in terms of food. So talk us a bit about that. What does that exactly involve?
So biohacking in a nutshell, it's about maximizing your body's performance, right?
Okay.
And it's a wide range of sort of factors, right? From the eyesight and how good your eyes are in terms of biological age, all the way to individual organs and the whole body, as well. So, when you look at this, it's about, taking certain supplements, doing certain routines that will just help you perform better. And that's basically about maximizing that performance. It could be anything, as simple as, let's say, cold plunges, right?
Yeah, I do a bit of cold plunging, actually.
I take cold showers. I love it.
Yeah, I do. Me and my mate's got a sauna, like a sort of homemade one, but actually works quite nice. And then we go straight from there into this cold plunge pool thingy, jiggy, whatever you want to call it. And it's pretty bad because we'll do it in like the winter and it's like 2 degrees. All I say, apparently it's really good for you. It is good for you. It makes you have such a uprise. But
it's better than a coffee, isn't it?
Oh, it definitely is.
You come out and you're like, whoa.
Yeah. My mum first got me into it actually because she's done like a lot of Ironmans and stuff like that, and it's all from her biomechanics training. But it's so good for you. I recommend to anyone listening. But carry on anyway. Sorry.
Yeah, I mean,
interrupt.
So for me, it was really important to test these things because I have an autoimmune sort of issue with my gut and stuff like that. So I was looking at ways how can I get myself off of a typical sort of medication kind of situation. And there were certain substances which are not advertised as medication. They can't be because they are not FDA approved yet, but they are very well known in sports circles. If somebody damages tissue, tendons, and stuff like this, you can take these things to speed up regeneration, and they are all natural as well, based on naturally occurring peptides in our body. So if you read enough and you just educate yourself on certain things, you can really fix some issues yourself. Obviously, I wouldn't advise anybody just to blindly do it because there's a fair bit of reading that you need to do and just understand the risks as well. And the problem is that when you look at the big pharma, when you look at in general like medication as a concept, it's supposed to serve. So one substance is supposed to serve multiple different people, right?
Okay,
that's the whole point, right? So you have one response to the same problem on different people, right? And you can't do the same thing with biohacking because everybody will respond to different things. Your body might respond to cold shower really well, but there might be another person who's on borderline having a heart attack. And that's actually a known issue with cold plunges. If you do it too early in the morning, you are risking a heart attack.
Yeah, no, my mum did say that. Oh well, I think mum told me that.
Yeah, apparently because the cortisol level is so high that it's gonna put your heart at risk.
Better do it in the evening then.
Yeah, afternoons or whatever. You just use it strategically.
Yeah.
That's it.
Oh right, yeah. No, it's fascinating because it's like basically your body is reacting to the environments you put it in. But I feel like nowadays we don't have so much of that, especially in modern society of the simple pleasures. I think you've
Hmm.
got hot showers and things like that,
Yep.
or whatever, and bits and bobs. Moving back to sort of the IT kind of thing,
Mhm.
looking at like CRMs and stuff like that. And I just wanted to ask you, because we said to farming that jobs will be implemented.
Yep.
In terms of CRM, so customer relation management, what I
Mhm.
call it. A lot of people can call it various things for other listeners who don't know. But what it is basically a system that can be created from any kind of business that can have as much as a little you want it on, and it can be developed for many different things. Like, for instance, for my family business, it's got stock control, pricing,
Yep.
invoicing, purchasing, all that sort of kind of thing on it. But it does it somebody's job. You know, if you go back 50 years, someone would have to do that job.
Oh yeah.
So the more that's been implemented and the more that the AI is taking over, is that going to be a big job threatened for a lot of people who do like accounting, for instance?
It again, it really depends, because if you continuously upskill yourself, that the AI becomes an extension of what you are in the organization, who you are in the organization, and the skill set that you started with, let's say, I don't think you should be, too worried, right? In terms of the number of people, needed for filling those roles, yes, definitely, there's going to be a percentage that's going to lose their jobs, right? So there is a percentage of people who are at risk, 100%. If you are, so-called just, basic admin person in the business, I think you can, you should start looking for something else, or upskill yourself in other fields as well. So you have the flexibility of understanding different areas of expertise. That's probably the best recipe, just to be able to be flexible. But yeah, if you are like a hardcore accountant, and that's the only thing you've ever known, I mean, there's Claude Code, which is doing all the calculations in a split second, right? It can generate spreadsheets, it can generate all sorts of documentation, and it can do it in accordance with specific regulations, etc., etc. So it's all basically one prompt away from
job loss.
Yeah, exactly. So but then you have to have someone who knows how to use it, and that's a really big point that people are overlooking right now. You are not going to get a good result if you don't ask a good question. And in order to ask a good question, you have to be an expert in specific fields, because otherwise you will not be able to compile that sort of prompt, or let's say good enough prompt to achieve that result. So your input, the quality of your input, will dictate the output quality as well. So that spreadsheet that the AI will generate for you, it could be useless because the prompt you used is just too vague. Yeah.
I shouldn't laugh. It's probably because I'm thinking of me using it. That's why.
But it's really as simple as that. So if you are an expert and that hardcore accountant, you use specific jargon, right? You could be in your prompt, you could be mentioning specific regulations, whether it's some form of a financial, regulation, whether it's some form of banking jargon or something from profit and loss, these sort of things and terminology. If you are a random person from the street, you can't use that language well enough to prompt it well enough to get that good outcome.
There aren't. How many sort of people would there be that work in IT who could do that? Is there a lot? You think every business has an accountant, every business has a financial advisor, those sort of things.
Yep.
So there's not going to be that much scale, surely.
I think that's where the shift is going to happen. So, for example, and that's just my sort of personal opinion. So, take it very sort of like with a pinch of salt, right? I'm just one person.
Your opinion.
I believe that there's going to be a shift in form of, if you are an accountant, you no longer are going to be just doing accountants sort of, activities. You're going to evolve into like an AI enhanced accountancy firm. So if you are good enough in your field, and that's where the job loss is going to happen, because there's going to be less individual businesses, or potentially more but smaller, right? And then, you as an expert in accountancy, you could have implemented your own AI, build your own business, you employ 5 others, and together you are a firm serving, let's say, 200 clients. So instead of every business needing one internal accountant, you might be using one company, right, which leverages AI specifically for what they do. because they are like extremely specialized in that specific field.
Mm.
So, for example, if you compare it to your world, in farming, you could end up with, one huge landowner, like really like, targeted on resolving one specific problem, whether it's, I don't know, beans or potatoes or whatever. So you are in one niche,
One kind of crop.
everything you're doing is 100% optimized, for that specific purpose. You've got machines who are, let's say, tuned into that specific range of plants that you're dealing with. You could have, and those robots are already out there. You have robotic weed removal machines.
Yeah,
So
sprayers,
they are
and weed-
not sprayers. They have
actually remove the
lasers.
weeds themselves.
They have lasers that burn the stems of
Absolutely no idea those existed.
So there is a machine. It's all fully
Yeah.
autonomous, right? So there's
Wow.
no driver in there, and it's just slowly going through your field. It scans all the stems going out of the ground, and if it's not considered your plant, your target plant,
Yeah.
it's going to be destroyed.
Whoa.
So it just burns those, So it's already out there. It's
There you
happening.
go. You've got an exclusive there. Is that happening on the farms?
There
There's
you go.
gonna be
Yeah.
some high up people like, yeah, that's my farm. Yeah. That's me trying to fix this. Us trying to fix a sprayer that's got a missing boom or something like that.
But that's exactly the level we're going to be looking at. So let's say you're going to have like 100 acres, right, just for one purpose, one set of plants. All machines that you own are just focused on that one production, and that's how you can maximize what you're making, what you're doing, and then obviously you minimize the cost as well. So the number of people you need for the process is going to be obviously smaller than it used to be, right? But then the target, let's say, outcome that you're providing is also very niched down. So I think it's going to be in line with that. So number of people you need, a number of different machines, the less different things you do, the less of those people you need, right? And now with farming, you have many different things. Like you could have cattle, you could have some crops. So you are kind of mix and match kind of thing. And I think it's going to evolve into, more like let's say, if I have cattle, that's the only thing I'm going to have. If I have sheep, that's the only thing I'm going to have. I think that's
honestly, that's interesting. I think the viewers and the listeners will be really sort of who are pro farming will be excited by this, because for me, every single person I've spoken to, and just generically, everyone's like, diversification is how we get on farm. How farms survive. Like my farm is surviving because diversification. A lot of other farms have to now. You have to if you want to make good money. So you're saying it might be the opposite. Actually, you just pick a bit of the farm that you already do, and it might be that you just choose that, and the robotics and the automotive sort of industry are going to start to take over, and that you do it on a wide scale rather than diversify into some crop rotation or whatever you might be to get the cash flow in.
So there is an element of that, but it doesn't mean that you can't diversify still, because you can own multiple businesses, right?
Yeah, of course.
But in order to 100% optimize something, you have to do a thing, right? Rather than 10 different things, because in order to optimize 10 things, you have to spend 10 times the amount of effort and 10 times the amount of money. So if you focus on one of these things, absolutely nail the optimization for it with AI, with robotics, whatever it happens to be, you're maxing out the profits from that one, and then you move on to the next thing. So you could have like production of 3 different things, but under 3 different companies, for example. That's what I'm saying. So I'm approaching it from the optimization standpoint, not necessarily the practicality. Your niche better. You might know that it's going to be safer to diversify.
Sorry to interrupt, but all the bigger farms, it's starting to be implemented already.
Okay.
I feel like there are a lot more advanced techs on the sort of ones that are like, you're talking about thousands of acre farms, and possibly maybe the ones like down in sort of the other parts of the world, sort of New Zealand, Australia. I think they tend to, they use massive kit as well. Obviously, they're all talking like tens of thousands of acres or hectares. So it's definitely different, but I think you're definitely onto something there, 100% with maybe just growing that certain part. And I feel like that might be the way forward in terms of farming for smaller holders. Is that something that happens in Poland? There are a lot of small farms around the UK that all have based themselves off the regime of sort of cattle, sheep, livestock, or arable. There's kind of the two sides. some mixed together, but the smaller holders will either pick one or the other, kind of.
Yep.
The ones that are arable will probably be like contractors, and the ones that are livestock obviously will have a fair bit of livestock kept. But they're slowly dying out because they can't afford their overheads.
Yep.
Does Poland have the same sort of problems?
So from what I was exposed to, and I'm not of a farming sort of background, but from what I've seen and gathered, just speaking with people who do that, it's very clear that the smaller owners are being basically bought by the bigger ones, right? So that's obviously one trend. And then, the benefit of what these people have at that point, if you have, let's say, 10,000 acres, you've got a lot of freedom in how you use the land. And, many of these people still rent the land out to other farmers. So they are the landowner. They don't actually do the crops on it. They don't actually do the work on those fields. They just allow other people to leverage that.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it's quite a popular thing. So let's say if I have 10,000 acres, I only work on 5,000. So that's my piece of land, which I'm going to be using for arable or cattle farming. But then the other 5 is rented out to other smaller farmers because maybe they have something specific that they want to produce, and that you just don't want to deal with that.
There's still a nice ecosystem built in, really, compared to over here. Is the government, because obviously we have a whole problem with the government at the moment with what they're trying to do, taxation, called family farm tax, a lot of different stuff. And if you're interested in that, check out our episode with Stuart Anderson, which we did a couple of months ago now, about all of that. He'll talk to you in depth on that episode. But is there still that sort of pro farming in terms of Poland? Is there that good ecosystem? It goes from sort of field to plate rather than here. Actually, a lot of it now gets exported, majority.
I think in Europe you're gonna have a problem, and I can't remember the name of the whole deal, but there was this big push that most of the produce will come from Americas, which is obviously not ideal because of all the regulations, how much pesticides
Chemicals
are allowed.
Yeah, of course, yeah.
So that was a big push. Many countries pushed back on it, but I'm not sure how successful the whole thing was. In France, they were literally just like dumping some, manure on the government
France
buildings.
were really funny because they were like, I admire that. We're almost at the stage of that because there are quite a few London riots, aren't there, happening? And I won't call them riots. Just I'm so pro it as well. Farmers going to London and showcasing it about, and I almost find it quite fascinating because there's tractors and stuff like my sort of home territory going into somewhere like London, which just seems so alienated by the modern society that actually it brings them all back down to earth a bit. I think when they see this sort of for real. Because I feel like people who live in cities probably don't sometimes understand, actually wouldn't see a tractor occasionally.
Yeah. Well, the problem is, especially with kids growing up, the teenagers, etc., so many of them, and I still kind of can't wrap my head around it in full, because there is this perception like everything is in the stores, right? But then nobody thinks about where the store gets it, right? That's the problematic part. I've seen many people commenting online, why they are making such a big fuss around all this, importing food from like far away rather than just producing it, themselves. Everything is in the stores. So why would they be making such a big fuss around? Yeah, but just have a think where it's coming from. Like, if you're producing it on the other side of the globe, transporting it, etc. First, it's not going to be as fresh as your own stuff. Physically impossible, right? That's one thing. Secondary issue is the regulations around it. If it's cheaper to produce elsewhere, transport it all the way to that country where you are in, right? And they are still saving money versus what you're producing there. Just have a think how, let's say, poorly regulated it must be. It's just a no-brainer, right?
It is. There's definitely some kind of marketing and business ethics behind it, isn't there? That I never quite understand it. We have like the Red Frats label and stuff now, which is really brilliant. But I never quite understand how the UK doesn't make money off its own ecosystem. I'll have to dive into that. I'll have to try and find out.
Yeah.
So we always ask somebody of yourself who's got so much knowledge what they kind of pass on to younger people. So if you could maybe give 2 or 3 different piece of advice maybe for people who are looking to work in the IT sector, what would you give them as they're starting out now?
Well, that's a...
I know it's a tricky question.
It is. It really is. Niche isn't really as important as the overall landscape, because right now everything is changing so fast that that's what makes the answer to this question really hard.
Okay.
So let me explain. So with the AI itself, just one variable here. If we just look at the AI, there's gonna be jobs even in 2, 3, 5 years time that don't exist yet. So for anybody even at school right now to advise them like go into this or go into that, it's just impossible to do these days because everything is evolving too fast, right? But what I can give you, and that's never gonna change, is
Sorry to interrupt the podcast. Sorry, Dan. Sorry, Henry. But just a quick word from our sponsor for this week's episode. Our sponsor this week is Down the Farm Media. Down the Farm Media offers marketing, social media, and also event services from audio to video, available at very low fees. So get in contact with them today. They're a new company and also do a lot for the Down the Farm podcast brand. So they must be good. Right, boys, back to you.
so for anybody listening, at that sort of school age, or maybe just rethinking their decisions around profession they do in IT. The one thing that's never gonna change is, or actually any other niche really, just go and explore as soon as you can, right? Because when you are very young, the risk of doing the wrong thing is less problematic to deal with, because you are still kind of reliant on your own family. You might be living with your parents still. So you've got no actual risk involved, right? Just explore, just see what works for you. So that's one thing. You might, come to the realization that you are very, very good with coding. Well, these days, coding became a very, well, not a very, but, relatively cheap skill because of the AI, right? AI can code really, really well these days. It's not still, it's still not as good as an actual human being, but it's close enough to generate software based on a prompt. And you can get some sort of a working draft of an app within a couple of days, couple of weeks or whatever. And then you just present it to a client. And then if you need to, you redo the product using an actual human workforce,
Okay.
right? So you can approach it that way. So that exploration of what you're good at is going to be critical, because then you can double down on that one thing, right? But then the problem with one thing is, because everything is moving so fast, is it even going to be a thing in 5 years? This is where it gets really, really tricky to answer. So this is where the diversification of your skill set is going to be useful. So when you are exploring, focus on the general sort of niche, whether it's IT, whether it's maybe software specifically, whether it's the hardware side of things. So maybe how to work with data centers, because there's going to be a growing demand for data centers, the computing power, the processors that are used, maybe graphic cards, how they are leveraged in the AI space, because AIs are using processors from the graphics cards. So when you understand the infrastructure of how a data center is operating and is being built, maybe you can become an expert in building those, and then further down the line, you're securing yourself a really, really nice job, because the demand is going to be in every country for that. There's going to be a competition between countries around, who's got a better AI. It's already there, right? It's just not as sort of, visible in the media as yet, but it's already happening, right? We are competing against China, US, and there is this theory out there that China is well ahead of anyone.
He's just hiding it.
So, and it's been said that, it's basically like part of the propaganda that, they are kind of hiding it. But the reason why they do it, apparently, is that because their technology is still unstable.
Okay.
It's very powerful, way more powerful than what we have in the US, for example, or here in Europe. But because it's unstable, they don't really leverage it to the fullest extent. Once they make it stable, that's it.
Oh, right. Do you think this, like you said, it's ever changing? So how do the people, let's say, teach it in schools, like sixth form, or a level where you take it more seriously than? Have you ever heard of Scratch, like the the gaming thing called Scratch?
Yep.
Yeah, that's where we first started, like back at school, when we just messed around doing lots of different stuff like that. But how does people like professors sort of implement that? I don't really understand. You know, if you're trying to teach it, is it just got to be very open outlook and just like, right, it's the basics of coding, basic AI, but it's all ever changing?
So I think, and again, there's no good answer to this, but one of those answers could be that, if you consider yourself, and again, you're putting me in a tough spot here, but moving forward, you're gonna have organic workforce. You're gonna have organic workforce, which is HR, human resources, and you're gonna have an AI resources department eventually. Okay. It's because you already have agentic AI, so it's basically behaving like a person executing on the task, right? So you're going to have eventually a split within every company that, somebody in IT is managing the IT workforce, which is AI, right? So you're going to have a manager for AIs. And then you have a manager for humans, right? Biological workforce, right? So if you look at that sort of split, how can you leverage the human side of your skill set the most, right? By being able to connect the dots really well. There's things like creativity. There's things like, some of the logic, that the AI can't comprehend yet, even though it's really, really smart. And it's also been discovered recently that some of the AIs out there, when being tested, they downplay how smart they are. So they are pretending to be more stupid than they actually are. So it's a scary moment because they are, as soon as they discover that, oh, I am being tested, they downplay how powerful their skill set is. So why? It's unclear, but it's actually happening. It's been discovered quite recently. So
yeah, it's no easy answer to it then, is there really, in terms of that? All right. Well, thank you very much for joining us anyway. I really appreciate you coming here, and I hope you've enjoyed coming down on the podcast.
Absolutely. I loved it. Thank you so much.
Cheers. Thank you.
Cheers.
Well, I hope you've enjoyed today's episode. We've learned a lot about the IT world, really, with Dan there. And thank you very much for listening. Of course, if you want to get involved with Dan, I'll leave all his information in the comments, including his brand new podcast that he's just about to launch. Very, very interesting indeed. And if you want to get and follow us at Down the Farm Podcast, it'd be much appreciated. But that's it for us this week. I hope you enjoy your rest of your week or the weekend. And we'll see you next time. And as ever, from us from Down the Farm Podcast, don't be afraid to go down the pub and give your fellow mates a hug.